The stars stretched endlessly across the black velvet of space, glittering like countless diamonds scattered by an unseen hand. From the grand observation deck of the Xylarian Palace, Queen Solara gazed at the distant constellations. The planets and moons of her empire lay beneath her feet, shimmering with the lights of countless cities. To outsiders, the Xylarian Empire seemed untouchable, a civilization of unmatched intelligence, power, and elegance. Yet for Solara, none of that mattered. Her mind wandered not to her crown or her people, but to the human she had chosen as her consort, Kale. Kale was unlike any being she had ever met. He was human, from a small, distant world called Earth, which most of her people considered primitive. They lacked the advanced technology, the psychic abilities, and the complex social systems that the Xylarians prided themselves on. And yet, Kale had captivated Solara, not with strength, power, or grandeur, but with something entirely different. His calm confidence, his sharp mind, and his quiet kindness. The alien court had not understood her choice. Many had whispered in the marble halls of the palace. A human, as the queen's consort? Is she foolish? Others had said. Some doubted humans could survive the pressures of court life, let alone the responsibilities of a consort. Kale, they feared, would embarrass the throne. Solara had ignored their murmurs. She had always done what was right, not what was expected. And her choice had been simple in her mind. Kale possessed something the stars themselves could not provide, a heart guided by courage, curiosity, and compassion. That morning, Kyle moved through the palace corridors with his usual ease. The grand halls of Xylaria were vast, their ceilings stretching high above in elegant arcs, adorned with crystal panels that reflected the sunlight streaming through enormous windows. Aliens of countless shapes and sizes moved through the palace, some floating gracefully on levitation devices, others walking with stately purpose, all dressed in garments that shimmered with colors beyond human imagination. Yet Kale navigated it all as if it were a place he had always known. A group of young Xylarians watched him pass. They were trainees, learning the ways of diplomacy, warfare, and leadership. One whispered, "Does he really belong here?" Another shook her head, eyes wide. "He is just a human. How can he match the Queen's mind?" Kale heard nothing. His focus was elsewhere. He stopped before a massive window that overlooked the central gardens of the palace. Trees with leaves like liquid silver swayed in the wind, and streams of water sparkled like flowing light. Children of the palace played among the flowers, their laughter echoing in the open spaces. Kyle smiled softly. He had never imagined seeing such beauty on any world he had known. Solara entered the hall silently, her presence commanding yet gentle. Her skin glimmered faintly under the sunlight, a pale green shade that marked her as a Xylarian of noble blood. Her eyes, deep and violet, studied Kale with a mixture of curiosity and fondness. "You seem at peace," she said, her voice melodic but firm. Kale turned to her and bowed slightly. "I try to be. This place, it is overwhelming, but beautiful. And the people, your people, they are not so different from me after all." Solara raised an eyebrow. "Not so different? That is a bold claim for a human." Kyle chuckled. "I have learned that courage, kindness, and curiosity are universal. I see it here, in their eyes and actions, even if they are very different from my own world." Solara allowed a small smile. "You always surprise me, Kale. I do not know if the Empire is ready to accept your perspective, though." "I do not need them to accept me," he replied calmly. "I only need to understand them, and to do my best." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Humans were strange creatures. They lacked the natural abilities that Xylarians had mastered over millennia. Some could manipulate energy, others could read minds, and most could communicate through thought as easily as words. Yet, humans relied on something different, something raw and unpolished. Kale's mind worked in ways she could not predict, and that unpredictability made him brilliant. That afternoon, a message arrived from the Alien Council. There were disturbances on the borders of the Xylarian Empire. Reports of rogue factions attacking small colonies, spreading fear among the citizens. The council was in chaos, debating endlessly over the best course of action. Solara read the reports with furrowed brows. It was not a small matter. The rogue groups were clever and well-armed, and the council was hesitant to act, fearing a larger conflict. Kale stood beside her, observing the holographic projections of the border worlds. "It seems they are unprepared," he said softly. "I can help. I can go to Zithar, assess the situation, and find a solution." Solara blinked. "You would go yourself? You do not have their training, their abilities?" Kyle shook his head. "I have my own skills. I observe, I think, and I listen. That is enough to start. I will need your support, of course." The Queen felt a mix of pride and anxiety. Sending a human into a potentially dangerous situation was unheard of. Yet she could see the certainty in his eyes, the calm, unwavering belief in his own abilities. Solara knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary human. She had chosen him for a reason. "Very well," she said finally. "You will go. But you must take a team. Select those you trust and take care of yourself." Kyle bowed. "I will. And I will not fail." Word of his mission spread quickly through the palace. Many were skeptical. Some even laughed quietly at the thought of a human leading a mission to the borders. Yet, others were curious. The young soldiers whispered about Kale's courage. The diplomats discussed his intelligence. Even the Queen's most trusted advisors began to wonder, could this human truly rise to the challenge? As preparations began, Kyle moved with deliberate care. He studied maps, practiced strategies, and chose a team of both humans and Xylarians who shared his approach to problem-solving: careful observation, patience, and understanding. Unlike the usual commanders, he did not rely on brute force. Instead, he planned for every possible outcome, considering not just the enemy, but the people who might be caught in the middle. Solara watched him work, a quiet admiration growing inside her. She remembered the day she first met him, when he had walked into the palace without fear, without arrogance, and yet with confidence that commanded attention. Now she saw that same confidence applied to real danger, and she could not help but be impressed. The day before Kale's departure, Solara visited him in the training halls. The room was filled with Xylarians practicing energy forms, moving with speed and precision that dazzled the eye. Kale, however, stood calm in the center, reviewing his plans. "You do not seem afraid," Solara remarked. Kyle looked up and smiled. "Fear is natural, but it is also useless if it stops you from acting. I focus on what I can do, not what I cannot." Solara shook her head in amazement. Humans were strange indeed. They were fragile in ways her people were not, yet they possessed a resilience that could not be measured by strength alone. "I hope the Empire can see what I see in you," she said softly. "You have always seen more than others," Kyle replied, "and I have learned to trust your judgment." That evening, the palace was alive with whispers and speculation. The Xylarian court had never faced a situation quite like this. A human was to lead a mission on behalf of the Empire, a being whose species they had long considered primitive. Yet, as the preparations continued, an undeniable energy filled the halls, a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. Solara stood on the observation deck once more, watching the stars. Kyle was in the training halls below, reviewing plans with his team. She felt a strange combination of hope and fear, excitement and uncertainty. But above all, she felt trust. Kale was not like anyone she had ever known. He was human, fragile by some measures, yet stronger than many in ways that could not be seen. For the first time, Solara understood why she had chosen him. Not for his power, not for his rank, but for something far greater, his courage, his mind, and his heart. Kyle was not just her consort. He was someone who could face the unknown, someone who could rise above expectations, and perhaps someone who could change the course of the galaxy. And as the stars twinkled above the Xylarian palace, Solara knew that the story of this human had only just begun. The stars above Xylaria shone like tiny beacons of hope, but the borders of the Empire were far from peaceful. On the planet Zithar, storms of dust and strange electrical winds swept across barren plains. Hidden among jagged cliffs and rocky valleys, a rogue faction had begun to gather, raiding small colonies and spreading fear wherever they went. The Council of Xylaria debated endlessly about how to respond. Some argued for diplomacy, others for direct military intervention, but no consensus was reached. Queen Solara stood in her private chambers reviewing the reports again. Maps of the border systems glowed in holographic projections, showing every colony, every route, and every potential threat. Her advisors hovered around, speaking rapidly, suggesting strategies and analyzing the odds. But Solara's mind was elsewhere. She thought of Kale, her human consort. Kale had been calm that morning, walking through the palace gardens as if the world's dangers were mere shadows. He had listened to her explain the situation without panic, his eyes thoughtful, absorbing every detail. Then, in a voice both steady and confident, he had said, "I can go, Your Majesty. I can see the truth of the situation myself, and I can find a way to resolve it." The council had nearly erupted in laughter at the suggestion. "A human?" one ambassador scoffed. "To lead a mission on the borders? It is madness." Another advisor nodded in agreement. "Humans are fragile. They are clever, perhaps, but they are not equipped to face threats of this scale." Solara had ignored them. She knew what Kale was capable of. She had seen his calm mind in action, his ability to analyze problems quickly, and his instinct to protect others. He did not rely on brute force or alien powers. He relied on understanding, observation, and careful planning. That was the kind of strength that could turn impossible situations into triumphs. "You will go," she said to Kale in a firm voice that brooked no argument. "But you will take a team. Choose wisely, and act with caution." Kale bowed, his expression serious but calm. "I will not fail." The next morning, Kale began preparations. He stood in the vast strategy hall of the palace, a place where Xylarian commanders had planned countless military operations. Holographic maps floated in mid-air, showing the rocky landscapes of Zithar in incredible detail. Kyle studied them carefully, noting every canyon, cliff, and hidden pathway. He selected a small team of soldiers, engineers, and scouts from both human and Xylarian backgrounds. Each one was skilled in their own way, but Kyle chose them not for their strength, but for their ability to think, observe, and adapt. He gathered them together in the central hall and spoke with a calm authority that silenced even the most skeptical members. "Zithar is dangerous," Kale began. "But danger is not a reason to panic. Our goal is not to conquer, but to understand and to protect. We will move carefully, observe our surroundings, and make decisions based on what we see. Trust each other, and we will succeed." The Xylarian soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Following a human into a potential battlefield went against everything they had been taught. Yet something about Kale's calm demeanor and clear plan inspired them. They nodded, unsure why, but ready to follow him. Kale spent the next hours reviewing every possible scenario. He considered the rogue faction's motives, their strengths and weaknesses, and even the geography of Zithar itself. He marked safe routes for civilians and potential ambush points for his team. He also trained with them, not with alien weapons or powers, but by running simulations, practicing teamwork, and rehearsing strategies that relied on thinking rather than force. By the end of the day, the team moved as one unit. Kale's leadership was quiet but effective. He did not shout orders or demand obedience. He guided, suggested, and encouraged. Slowly, the soldiers began to see that there was more to leadership than power. It was about vision, patience, and trust. The journey to Zithar was long. Kyle and his team traveled aboard a sleek Xylarian starship, gliding silently through the void. Humans aboard the ship marveled at the technology, corridors that shifted in length, windows that displayed the stars in breathtaking clarity, and systems that responded to thought alone. Yet Kyle remained focused on the task ahead. He spent the journey reviewing reports, communicating with the remote sensors on Zithar, and speaking with his team about possible obstacles. Every day, he emphasized the importance of observation. "Watch carefully," he told them. "Not just what is in front of you, but what is hidden. The world often reveals its truths to those who are patient." Solara monitored the mission from the palace. Through advanced holographic sensors, she could see Kyle and his team as they trained, strategized, and traveled. She was both proud and anxious. Her human consort was venturing into the unknown, facing dangers that even the most skilled Xylarian soldiers might struggle with. And yet, she could see the confidence in his eyes, the calm determination that set him apart. Hours turned into days as the starship neared Zithar. The first signs of the rogue faction appeared on the sensors: small patrols, makeshift fortifications, and the scattered ruins of colonies that had been attacked. Kyle studied the information carefully, noting patterns in the faction's movements. He began to formulate a plan, not of attack, but of engagement, observation, and protection. "We will approach quietly," he explained to his team, "and assess their intentions. We must understand them before acting. We are not here to fight blindly, but to find a solution that keeps everyone safe." The team prepared for landing. Drones flew ahead to scout, mapping the terrain and identifying potential hazards. Kyle's calm voice guided the team through each step, ensuring that every member knew their role and could act independently if needed. The soldiers who had doubted him began to trust his judgment. They saw how he thought, how he planned, and how he cared for their safety above all else. When they finally landed on Zithar, the planet was harsh and unwelcoming. Red dust swirled around jagged cliffs, and strange winds carried an electric charge that made the air shimmer. The rogue faction's encampments lay hidden in valleys, camouflaged with natural rock formations. It was easy to see why the Council had feared this mission. Any misstep could have been disastrous. Kyle led his team cautiously. They moved quietly through the rocky landscape, using natural cover and observing every detail. They discovered small groups of the rogue faction, but instead of attacking immediately, Kyle studied them. He noted their behavior, their organization, and even their hesitation. It became clear that this was not a mindless enemy. They were desperate, disorganized, and acting out of fear rather than malice. "This is important," Kyle said softly to his team. "They are not invincible. Understanding them is the key to resolving this situation. Watch, learn, and be ready to act when the time is right." As they advanced, Kale's careful observation revealed more. The rogue faction had taken resources from abandoned colonies, building crude defenses and scavenging technology. But the local civilians were not yet harmed. They were hiding, terrified, but alive. Kale realized that this mission was about protection, not destruction. That evening, Kale set up a small camp in a sheltered valley. The team rested, shared food, and discussed their observations. For the first time, some of the soldiers spoke openly about their admiration for him. "He sees things we cannot," one of the Xylarians said quietly. "He understands the enemy without even fighting them." Kyle smiled gently. Observation is often stronger than confrontation. Violence is easy, but understanding requires patience, and patience saves lives. The human soldiers nodded. They had trained for years, yet they had never encountered leadership like this. Kale's approach was different. It was not about domination, but about insight, empathy, and strategy. That night, Kale sent a report back to Solara. He explained what he had observed, the behavior of the rogue faction, and his plan to engage them without unnecessary conflict. Solara read the report with growing admiration. Her human consort was not only brave and clever, but he was compassionate and wise. She realized, more than ever, why she had chosen him. The next morning, Kale led his team toward the rogue faction's main encampment. He moved carefully, using natural cover and signaling silently to his team. As they approached, they saw the faction in full view for the first time. The humans and Xylarians in Kale's team felt a surge of tension, but Kyle remained calm. "We do not rush in," he reminded them. "We observe first, we act only when necessary, and we act to protect, not to harm." From a hidden vantage point, Kyle and his team watched the rogue faction's leaders communicate, arguing over strategy and resources. They were clearly disorganized, struggling to maintain control. Kyle noted weaknesses and opportunities, not for attack, but for negotiation and peaceful resolution. For hours, he observed, recording patterns and preparing for a careful approach. Every decision he made was deliberate, every move calculated to protect civilians and minimize conflict. As the sun set over Zythar, painting the sky in brilliant reds and purples, Kale felt a sense of quiet determination. This was his challenge, not to prove his strength, but to prove that understanding, intelligence, and courage could succeed where brute force might fail. Solara, watching from across the stars, knew her consort was extraordinary. She felt pride, admiration, and a growing certainty that this human, fragile in some ways, yet remarkable in others, was destined to achieve greatness. And so, on the rocky plains of Zythar, under alien skies, Kyle prepared to face the greatest test of his mission. Knowing that the lives of many depended not on weapons, but on wisdom, patience, and heart. The red dust of Zythar swirled in the fading light, making the rocky plains look like an endless sea of fire. Kyle crouched behind a jagged boulder, his team spread carefully across the valley. Each member moved with precision, following his silent gestures. The rogue faction had been spotted, and Kyle knew the moment to act had come. But action did not mean rushing in blindly. He observed first. From their hidden position, Kale and his team watched the rogue faction. The enemy was disorganized, but dangerous if underestimated. Leaders barked orders while smaller groups patrolled the surrounding terrain. Supplies were scattered haphazardly, and their defenses were strong in appearance but weak in design. Kyle took a deep breath. This was the test he had prepared for, the moment where patience and observation had to meet decisive action. "We move carefully," he whispered to his team. "Stick to the shadows. Protect the civilians. Every move counts." The team nodded, their eyes wide with respect. They had followed orders before, but never with such quiet confidence guiding them. Kale's calm presence was infectious. Even in the midst of danger, fear seemed to lose its grip. As they approached, Kyle noticed a group of civilians hiding near the rocky cliffs. They were trembling, unsure if the humans approaching were friend or foe. Kyle motioned to his team to secure a safe path. Carefully, silently, they moved to shield the civilians. Kale spoke softly, assuring them in a calm voice that they were safe. The civilians hesitated at first, but Kale's sincerity was undeniable. Slowly, they followed him, moving along the safe route he had planned. The soldiers, initially skeptical of his cautious methods, were beginning to understand. Strength alone did not win battles. Strategy, observation, and care for others could achieve more. Kale then turned his attention to the rogue faction. He had spotted their weak points, poorly guarded flanks, disorganized patrols, and communication gaps among the leaders. Instead of charging forward, Kale devised a clever plan. Using the natural terrain and the scattered debris, he and his team created a series of diversions, making the faction think that reinforcements had arrived from multiple directions. "Watch them carefully," Kyle instructed. "We do not need to fight. We need them to see us as a force they cannot ignore." From their hidden positions, Kyle's team executed the plan flawlessly. They moved silently, nudging rocks to cause small landslides, redirecting dust storms to obscure visibility, and making strategic noises that suggested a larger force than actually existed. The rogue faction hesitated. Confused by the sudden movements and misjudging the size of Kale's team, they began to reorganize, unsure where the next threat would come from. Kale saw the opening he needed. He signaled to his team to advance carefully. No weapons were drawn unnecessarily. Kale relied on clever tactics and controlled maneuvers. Using the environment, they were able to cut off the rogue faction's escape routes without confronting them head-on. Kale then stepped forward, emerging in view of the faction leaders. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace, speaking clearly so all could hear. "We are not here to harm you," he said, "but your actions threaten lives and they must stop. Lay down your weapons, and we will help you find safety and purpose." The rogue leaders stared at him, shocked. A human speaking with calm authority, outnumbered and unarmed, yet standing with the confidence of someone who had already calculated every outcome. For a moment, silence hung over the valley. One of the faction leaders, a tall alien with jagged markings on his face, stepped forward, sneering. "Why should we listen to a human? You have no power here." Kyle smiled, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. "Power is not measured in weapons or size. It is measured in understanding, in patience, and in the courage to do what is right. You have made mistakes, but you can choose a better path now. Follow me, and you will be safe." The leader hesitated. Kale's words carried an honesty and clarity that the rogue faction had not expected. Slowly, the tension began to fade. Some of the smaller groups dropped their weapons, realizing that this human was not there to fight them, he was there to protect. Kale's team moved carefully among the rogue faction, securing civilians and guiding the surrendered members to safety. Every step was precise, every decision measured. The humans and Xylarians working under Kale's command began to understand the true meaning of leadership. It was not about forcing others to obey, it was about inspiring trust, showing courage, and thinking one step ahead. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape, the rogue faction had been contained. No one was harmed unnecessarily, and civilians were escorted safely to a temporary refuge Kale had identified earlier. The faction leaders, now calm, began to speak with Kale, discussing how they could live without resorting to attacks. Kale listened carefully, asking questions and offering guidance. His approach was unusual for both humans and Xylarians alike. He did not humiliate the leaders or boast about victory. Instead, he focused on solutions, on building trust, and on ensuring the safety of all involved. Solara, observing from across the stars, was astonished. She had seen many battles, many leaders, many generals, but she had never witnessed anything like this. Kale's victory was quiet, clever, and humane. He had achieved what many thought impossible. He had neutralized a dangerous threat without unnecessary violence, using his mind, his strategy, and his heart. As the night fell over Zethar, Kale's team set up a secure camp. The rogue faction members were guarded but treated fairly. Civilians moved freely, safe for the first time in weeks. Kale sat beside a small fire, thinking over the day's events. One of the Xylarian soldiers, a young trainee who had been skeptical from the start, approached him. "I do not understand," she admitted. "How did you do it? You had no power over them, no weapons stronger than ours, and yet you controlled the situation completely." Kale looked at her and smiled. "Leadership is not about showing power. It is about seeing clearly, understanding the needs of others, and guiding them toward the best choice. They followed because they knew I would not harm them unnecessarily and because they realized they could trust me." The trainee nodded slowly, her respect evident. Others gathered around, listening to Kale's calm explanation. For them, the lesson was clear. Courage, intelligence, and compassion were more powerful than force alone. That night, Kale sent another report back to Solara. He explained what had happened, how the rogue faction had been contained, and the steps he had taken to protect civilians. Solara read the report in her private chamber, her eyes widening in admiration. Her human consort had done more than she had hoped. He had not only survived his first real challenge, he had succeeded brilliantly, using his mind and heart rather than brute force. Solara felt pride and something else, too. A growing certainty that Kyle was extraordinary. She had chosen him as her consort, not for his species, but for his character. Now she saw that he was capable of greatness beyond anything she had imagined. The stars outside her chamber glimmered, reflecting her thoughts. Kyle had faced danger, uncertainty, and doubt, and had emerged not only unscathed, but victorious. His actions would be remembered across Xylaria, not just for the results, but for the way he had achieved them, with care, patience, and intelligence. As dawn broke over Zethar, Kyle prepared for the next steps. The rogue faction leaders had agreed to return with him to a secure location, where they could be guided toward a peaceful life. Civilians were beginning to rebuild their homes, inspired by Kale's calm and careful leadership. Kale stood on a cliff overlooking the valley, watching the sun rise over the red plains. His team gathered beside him, tired but proud. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "There is much work ahead, but we have proven today that understanding, courage, and planning can accomplish what brute force cannot. Remember that." The Xylarian soldiers, humans, and even the rogue faction members nodded, their eyes bright with new respect. Kale had not only won a battle, he had shown them the power of patience, observation, and leadership guided by compassion. Solara, watching from across the galaxy, allowed herself a small smile. She had always known Kale was special, but now the universe itself seemed to agree. He was a human, yes, but more than that. He was a leader, a protector, and perhaps a legend in the making. And so, on the harsh plains of Zethar, under alien skies and the rising sun, Kale's journey continued, not with the roar of weapons or the flash of power, but with quiet brilliance, steady courage, and the unwavering belief that humanity could rise to meet any challenge. The Battle of Zethar was won, not by force, but by heart, mind, and strategy. And those who witnessed it near and far would not forget the human who had achieved it. The sun rose over Zethar, casting long shadows across the rocky plains. Dust swirled gently in the early morning breeze, sparkling in the soft light. Kale stood on a cliff overlooking the valley, watching as the people he had protected began to rebuild their homes. The rogue faction members he had guided were now helping repair the settlements, their expressions cautious but hopeful. It had been days since the battle, Yet the calm that now settled over Zethar was almost magical. The once tense, chaotic valley now hummed with activity. Children laughed as they played among the rocks. Traders began arranging supplies, and the settlers quietly began planting crops. Kale's careful planning had turned fear into hope, and his team moved among the people, helping wherever needed. Kale surveyed the scene with quiet satisfaction. His human heart felt light. He had come to Zethar not to conquer or destroy, but to protect and guide. And seeing the results, he realized how much even a single human mind could accomplish when paired with careful thought, empathy, and patience. Back at the palace, Queen Solara observed Kale's progress through advanced communication systems. Holographic images of Zethar flickered in the grand control room, showing him leading his team, protecting civilians, and negotiating with the rogue faction. Solara felt a mixture of pride and awe. "Unbelievable," she whispered to herself, her violet eyes fixed on the images. "He is extraordinary." Her advisors hovered around her, speaking quickly about the situation, but Solara barely heard them. They had expected humans to fail, to struggle, or to be overpowered. Instead, Kale had accomplished what even the most skilled Xylarians might have approached differently, and perhaps not as successfully. Solara's thoughts returned to the first time she had met him, to the calm confidence in his eyes, and to the way he had listened, observed, and understood. Now she realized the truth. Kale's strength was not in his species, nor in raw power. It was in his mind, his heart, and his ability to rise to challenges that others could not even face. Word of Kale's success spread quickly across the empire. Reports from Zethar reached the palace, describing how the human consort had neutralized the rogue faction, protected civilians, and inspired trust among both allies and former enemies. Messages from distant colonies praised him for his ingenuity and courage. Even ambassadors who had once doubted him began to speak of him with respect. The young Xylarians who had watched Kale train and lead on Zethar were inspired. They spoke of him in whispers. "The human, he is more than a soldier. He is a leader. He sees what others cannot." Another trainee added, "He does not fight like we do. He fights with his mind, and somehow that is stronger." Solara smiled quietly. Her consort was changing not only her perception, but the perceptions of everyone around him. He was showing the galaxy that humans, though fragile in appearance, possessed a unique brilliance that could overcome even the most difficult challenges. On Zethar, Kale worked tirelessly alongside his team. Every day brought new challenges, helping the rogue faction members integrate into the settlements, ensuring civilians had food and shelter, and training both humans and Xylarians to cooperate in building a safe community. Kale's methods were simple but effective. He encouraged everyone to communicate openly, to share knowledge, and to respect each other's strengths. The rogue faction leaders, once suspicious and defiant, now looked to Kale for guidance. He treated them not as enemies, but as individuals capable of better choices. He asked questions, listened carefully, and suggested actions that built trust rather than fear. Slowly, they began to understand the value of cooperation and the benefits of peace. Kale's team observed this transformation with admiration. They had trained for conflict, but what they were witnessing was far greater. A human leading not through force, but through understanding and example. Each action Kale took seemed to inspire loyalty, respect, and hope. Solara, meanwhile, could not hide her growing admiration. She had always believed in strength, intelligence, and strategy as the foundation of leadership. Yet Kale's actions had expanded her understanding. Humans, she realized, possessed qualities that were rare even among her people: intuition, empathy, and courage tempered by thoughtfulness. Solara decided to meet with Kale remotely. Through a communication link, his image appeared on a holographic screen. Kale bowed politely, as he always did when speaking to her. "You have done more than I imagined," Solara said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You have not only protected lives but inspired loyalty and trust. How do you do it?" Kyle smiled softly. "I watch, I listen, and I think. I try to understand the people I work with and even those I oppose. Strength is important, yes, but understanding and patience often achieve more." Solara studied him carefully, feeling a mixture of pride and amazement. "You are extraordinary, Kale. Not for your species, but for who you are. I always knew humans could surprise me, but this is beyond what I expected." Kale's expression remained humble. "I am only doing what I can. The team, the civilians, they make it possible. I could not do this alone." Solara nodded. She had always valued independence and strength, yet Kale's humility only made him more remarkable in her eyes. Here was someone who could lead, inspire, and protect without arrogance, someone who could turn obstacles into opportunities through patience, intellect, and heart. Word of Kyle's success reached the neighboring systems. Colonies that had once feared conflict now looked to the Xylarian Empire with renewed hope. Reports praised Kale's ingenuity, his courage, and his ability to resolve situations without unnecessary violence. Stories spread of the human consort who had faced danger with calm, careful planning and emerged victorious. In the palace, Solara convened a meeting with her council. The room buzzed with discussion. Some members were eager to celebrate Kale's achievements. Others still hesitated, unable to fully grasp the abilities of a human. "He has proven himself beyond any doubt," Solara said firmly. "He is not only my consort but a leader whose example can inspire the entire empire. We must recognize what he has done and learn from it." The council fell silent, absorbing her words. Even the most skeptical advisors could not deny the evidence. Kyle had succeeded where others might have failed, not through power, but through intelligence, observation, and heart. Meanwhile, Kyle continued to work with his team on Zithar. Each day brought new opportunities to teach, guide, and protect. He emphasized teamwork, careful planning, and compassion. The humans and Xylarians under his command began to internalize his lessons. Learning that leadership was more than issuing commands, it was about inspiring trust and making thoughtful decisions. The rogue faction leaders also began to change. Once wary and hostile, they now worked alongside the settlers, building homes, gathering food, and repairing damage. Kale spoke to them patiently, showing them how to use their skills for the benefit of the community. Slowly, they began to see that cooperation and respect were far stronger than fear and aggression. Kale's actions did more than stabilize Zithar. They set an example. Humans and Xylarians working together under the guidance of a human leader achieved what many had thought impossible. Civilians were safe. Rogue faction members were learning new ways of living, and the settlements began to thrive. At the end of the day, Kyle gathered his team on a small hill overlooking the valley. The red sky glowed softly as the sun sank below the horizon. Kyle spoke quietly, his words carrying weight without force. "Today we have done something important," he said. "Not because we fought, but because we acted wisely and with care. Leadership is not about showing power. It is about seeing clearly, protecting others, and making choices that create trust and hope. Remember this, and it will guide you in every challenge you face." The team listened in silence, absorbing his words. They had followed him into what could have been a dangerous situation, and yet they had come out stronger, wiser, and inspired. Kale's influence extended beyond the battlefield. He was shaping hearts and minds through example. Solara watched him from across the stars, feeling a mixture of admiration and awe. For centuries, she had ruled with intelligence, strategy, and authority. Yet Kale had shown her a different kind of greatness, one she had never fully appreciated. Humans were not the strongest species, nor the most advanced, but their courage, intuition, and heart were unparalleled. Solara realized that Kale was more than her consort. He was a symbol of hope and inspiration, a living proof of humanity's potential. His actions on Zethar had demonstrated that even in the face of danger, compassion and intelligence could triumph over chaos. For the first time, Solara felt a deep certainty. She had chosen not just a partner, but a being whose actions would be remembered, celebrated, and emulated. Kale was not just extraordinary. He was a legend in the making. As the night fell on Zethar, Kyle and his team rested under the stars. The valley, once a place of fear and conflict, now felt alive with possibility. Civilians slept safely, rogue faction members worked alongside settlers, and the team looked to Kale with quiet respect. Kale gazed at the sky, thinking of Solara and the palace far across the galaxy. He felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The challenge of Zethar had tested him, his skills, and his heart, but it had also shown the power of patience, observation, and care. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready. Solara, watching from afar, whispered to herself, "This human, he is more than I ever imagined. He is a legend, and I am fortunate to walk beside him." And so, with Zethar stabilized and Kale's reputation spreading across the Empire, the stage was set for the next chapter. The galaxy had begun to see what Solara had always known. Humans, when guided by heart and mind, could achieve greatness beyond measure. The stars above the Zalarian palace shone like scattered jewels, reflecting in the crystal surfaces of the throne room. The palace was alive with quiet excitement as preparations for the grand ceremony unfolded. Today was not just a celebration of love. It was a recognition of courage, leadership, and the extraordinary qualities of a human who had changed the course of the galaxy. Kyle stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by the Xylarian Council, his team, and representatives from colonies across the Empire. He had returned from Zethar, carrying with him not only the gratitude of civilians and former rogue faction members, but also the admiration of soldiers, diplomats, and ordinary citizens alike. Every step he had taken had been guided by patience, intelligence, and care, and now the galaxy waited to honor him. Solara entered the hall, her presence commanding yet gentle. Her pale green skin shimmered softly in the ambient light, and her violet eyes were fixed on Kale with a mixture of pride, love, and awe. She had witnessed his actions on Zethar, seen the way he led without arrogance, and understood that this human consort was no ordinary being. He was a leader, a protector, and a symbol of hope. The gathered crowd fell silent as Solara approached Kale. Even the most skeptical members of the council could not hide their respect. Humans were rare among Xylarians, and few had ever achieved what Kale had. Yet here he stood, not as a conqueror, but as a hero whose heart, mind, and courage had inspired countless lives. The ceremony began with words of recognition. The chief ambassador spoke, praising Kale for his actions on Zethar, his leadership, and his ability to unite humans and Xylarians alike. "In the history of our empire," the ambassador said, "rarely has a single individual achieved so much through wisdom, patience, and courage. Kale has shown us the strength of the human spirit, and in doing so, he has earned not only respect, but lasting admiration." Kale listened quietly, bowing politely. He did not boast, nor did he seek attention. His humility was as remarkable as his accomplishments. He had acted not for recognition, but because he knew it was the right thing to do. Yet even as others praised him, he felt a quiet warmth in his chest, the knowledge that his actions had made a difference. Solara stepped forward, her hand reaching for his.
"Kyle,
she said, her voice clear and steady. You have shown us what it truly means to lead, to protect, and to inspire. Today, I stand before you not only as a queen, but as someone who has witnessed greatness firsthand. You are my partner, my consort, and my legend. Kyle looked at her, his calm expression softening into a gentle smile. Solara, I could not have done any of this without your trust, guidance, and belief in me. You saw potential in a human when others could not. And because of you, I was able to act with confidence. The crowd remained silent, captivated by the moment. It was rare to see such openness between a human and an alien queen, yet the admiration in the room was undeniable. Kyle and Solara were not just partners, they were equals, united by respect, trust, and shared purpose. The ceremony continued with the union of Kale and Solara officially recognized. Ancient traditions were observed, yet there was also a modern element, the celebration of humanity's resilience, creativity, and courage. Delegates from Zithar arrived, bringing gifts of gratitude from the civilians and former rogue faction members. Children waved small banners, celebrating the humans and Xylarians who had helped them. Kale moved among the guests, offering quiet words of encouragement, gratitude, and reassurance. He spoke to the civilians, reminding them of the importance of community and cooperation. He spoke to the former rogue faction leaders, showing them a future of possibilities and growth. And he spoke to his team, praising their courage, intelligence, and teamwork. Every word was thoughtful, measured, and sincere. Solara watched him closely, her admiration growing with each passing moment. She remembered the first day she had met him, the calm confidence in his eyes, and the quiet strength he had displayed. Now she saw that his abilities extended far beyond the battlefield. He was a true leader, capable of inspiring hope in all who followed him. As the ceremony reached its peak, Solara took Kale's hands in hers. Kale, she said, her voice resonating through the hall, today we celebrate more than a union. We celebrate courage, wisdom, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit. You have shown that greatness is not measured by size, strength, or species, but by heart, mind, and action. I am proud to walk beside you, and the galaxy will remember your deeds for generations. Kyle nodded, his eyes reflecting the soft light of the palace. Solara, you have given me the chance to do what I could not have done alone. You trusted me when others doubted. You believed in me, and because of that, we have achieved something remarkable. Together we will continue to protect, inspire, and lead. The crowd erupted into applause, not just for the union of two beings from different worlds, but for the story they represented, a story of courage, understanding, and humanity's potential. Humans had often been underestimated, dismissed as fragile or limited, yet Kale's actions had proven otherwise. Through intelligence, patience, and heart, he had achieved what many thought impossible. After the ceremony, Kyle and Solara walked together through the palace gardens. The silver leaves of the trees shimmered in the soft light, and streams of water reflected the stars above. The gardens were alive with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and celebration. Kale felt a quiet joy. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and skepticism, and emerged not only victorious, but respected, admired, and trusted by an entire civilization. Solara paused, looking at him with a mixture of pride and love. "Do you realize, Kale," she said softly, "what you have done? You have not just led a mission or protected lives. You have shown the galaxy what humans are capable of. You have rewritten the story of your species in the eyes of my people." Kyle smiled gently. "I only did what I thought was right. The humans and Xylarians I worked with made it possible. I acted because it mattered, not for glory, but because people needed guidance, safety, and hope." and I had you by my side, trusting me all the way." Solara shook her head, a small smile forming on her lips. "It is more than that, Kale. You are not just a consort, you are a legend. Your courage, patience, and insight have inspired us all. I knew you were extraordinary, but now the entire Empire will know it too." News of Kale's deeds spread across the stars. Colonies far from Xylaria celebrated his leadership, sharing stories of the human who had led with wisdom and compassion. In the academies, young Xylarians and humans studied his methods, learning that intelligence and empathy could triumph over fear and chaos. Leaders sought guidance from him, inspired by the way he approached challenges. Even the rogue faction members on Zithar had begun to thrive. They had learned to work with others, to build rather than destroy, and to trust in leadership that prioritized understanding over domination. Kale's influence reached beyond immediate victories. It had planted seeds of hope, cooperation, and growth that would continue to flourish long after he had left Zithar. Solara observed these developments from the palace. Her pride in Kale was immense. She had seen him in action, faced danger beside him, and watched him inspire trust and courage wherever he went. He was not only her consort, he was her equal, her partner, and her legend. As the ceremony drew to a close, Kale and Solara stood together on a balcony overlooking the palace city. The lights of Xylaria shimmered like stars fallen to the ground, and the gentle hum of activity filled the air. Civilians, soldiers, and visitors moved below, celebrating the union of two beings whose partnership symbolized hope, courage, and unity. Kyle turned to Solara. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "There will be challenges ahead, and more people will need guidance, protection, and hope. But together, we can face anything." Solara nodded, her eyes shining. "I know, Kale, and I will walk beside you through every challenge. You are human, yet extraordinary. Today the galaxy knows it, but I have always known it." They held hands, standing in quiet reflection, knowing that their partnership was more than a union of hearts. It was a testament to the potential of humanity, the strength of compassion, and the power of wisdom over brute force. Kyle had faced doubt, danger, and uncertainty, and had emerged not only victorious, but legendary. The stars above sparkled, as if acknowledging the greatness of the human beside the queen. And the galaxy, too, seemed to recognize what Solara had always known. Kyle was a hero, a leader, and a legend whose story would be remembered for generations. As night fell, the palace was calm, filled with quiet celebration. Kyle and Solara stood together on the balcony, gazing at the horizon. The Empire had changed, thanks to the courage, intelligence, and heart of one human. And as they looked toward the stars, they both knew that this was only the beginning of their shared journey, a journey of hope, inspiration, and extraordinary achievements. Kyle's legend had begun, not with weapons or conquest, but with patience, understanding, and unwavering courage. And beside him, Solara, the wise and mighty queen, stood ready to face the future, confident that together they could achieve greatness beyond imagination. The story of the human who became a legend was no longer a secret. It was celebrated across worlds, a symbol of what humanity could achieve, not through power alone, but through heart, mind, and courage. And in that moment, under the shimmering stars and the peaceful skies of Xylaria, Kale and Solara began a new chapter, one of partnership, inspiration, and a future where the impossible was simply another challenge to overcome.